This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power. If you haven't heard the previous chapters, you'll find the link to the playlist in the description below. You can start at chapter 1 or just pick up where you left off. Book 1, Shattered. Chapter 18, Lots of planets have a north. Exhausted, we slept like the nearly dead people we were. We hadn't eaten any dinner, hadn't needed any. In the morning, Gaia came in with food and warm clothing for us, informing us that Worm desired an audience. Glenn looked resplendent in the various shades of blue velvet hemmed with wool fluff. The blue complemented his gold-flecked eyes so brilliantly, I found it hard to resist the urge to constantly admire him. I was given the same type of clothing in shades of yellow, mostly mustard and gold. I looked in a mirror for the first time since my scars had reappeared. I whimpered. Glenn came up behind me, his face coming into focus above mine in the long glass. We both looked haggard, thinner than usual and littered with scars. But it wasn't as bad as it could be. The scars had fused cleanly. There were no lumps or twisting globs of flesh. I had sprays of scar tissue flowing down my back and over my shoulders like a frozen waterfall from the whipping. The slit in my throat was now obnoxious, thick and pink. There was a vertical scar through my right eyebrow and a few around my mouth where my teeth had been kicked through my lips. But overall, I remained all right looking. "You're beautiful," Glenn said, kissing the top of my head and breathing in deeply. "So are you, darling. Now, let's go meet Worm." He took my hand, and we followed Gaia down the long stone corridors of her home. We went through a massive kitchen with a wooden door at the far end. Beyond that door and down a winding staircase, we found ourselves several layers beneath the earth. The stairway opened into a large cavern. Stalactites and stalagmites hung or jutted from every surface, as if we were stepping into a giant stone mouth. Some were so long they met in the middle, forming large columns that supported the roof above our heads. There was an enormous pool of water on the other end of the cavern, but nearer to us was a lot of churned earth, freshly turned. Gaia excused herself and left us alone, her layered skirts rustling up the stairs with her soft footfalls. It felt unbearably ancient here. The earth shook, casting ripples on the surface of the cave pool. Worm pushed his massive blind head up through the ground at our feet, stopping just short of stabbing himself with stalactites. Glenn stepped back a few paces, and I realized that he likely didn't remember meeting Worm before. "Well met, lovers Ellenbill. Welcome to my kingdom," the Worm said, somehow. He didn't have any eyes, and his tiny mouth never moved. "Thank you for letting us recover here. Gaia has been very helpful and kind." I pulled Glenn to stand next to me. "She is a great friend," Worm said. "Elf, do you not remember me? I suppose you wouldn't. You were near death." I explained. "Worm brought us here through his tunnels just after we rescued you. The others are on their way. We wouldn't have made it otherwise." "Thank you, Watcher of the Northern Lands," Glenn said, bowing low. Worm lowered his head in response. "I have come to answer questions," he said to me. "I have lots. Are you sure you've got time for this?" "Sit, child. Ask," he said with a hint of a smile apparent in his tone, if not his face. Glenn and I sat on the moist earth. It was surprisingly comfortable beneath us. The air down here was still chilly, but the ground felt warm to the touch. I let my fingers sink into the soil. "Well, first of all, I have a mark on my bottom. A triangle with an eye on the top. Any idea where that came from?" "Yes, that is the mark of the warlord. It is a tribute to his master, Lucifer. You would call him Satan. It symbolizes Lucifer as the light of the world, the pinnacle of knowledge, the god of the initiated few. You have the mark because when they meant you to be their avatar, they had it placed on you. I'm afraid it's permanent." "Okay, next question. How did the warlord survive for 1,000 years? He was half man, half angel, but that doesn't mean he's immortal, right?" "He died around age 100. His wife had died many years before him. He is but a shadow of himself now, though still immensely powerful. What do you know of the Nephilim? Not much, just that some of the angels came and took human women, and they had hybrid children that did terrible things, so terrible that God had to flood the entire earth. That's right. Later, they were called the Rephaim, Emim, Horim, Zamsumim, and Anakim, otherwise known as the giants, the walking dead. They are not eligible for resurrection. They have corrupted spirits. There is no place for such unholy monsters in the kingdom of God. So they live on in the earthly realms. Some call them demons, some ascended masters, some gods. They are bound to the earth on which they lived, and they often haunt there. The Nephilim are special. They aren't fallen angels or fallen humans. They are both and neither. They have knowledge of the spaces between realms and how to cause mischief and even great harm to God and his creations. Prigil Lort is one such being. So he died, but his spirit is still alive on Earth because there's nowhere else for it to go, Glenn said. Very good, elf, Worm praised. He had knowledge of the realms and the spaces between, but how was he allowed in? Have you had Nephilim incursions here before? I asked. No, he had help, Worm answered. From whom? Glenn and I both asked simultaneously. We looked at each other, then at Worm, awaiting the answer. From Silver. I heard the sadness in his voice. Silver, the mermaid? The Watcher, Silver? I asked, incredulous. Yes, he seduced her, promised to love her and make her his queen if she would let him into our world. He had neither right nor ability to come here, so she told him about the dead spring. One drop of blood and water is all that is required to summon me, I quoted softly. Glenn made a sudden understanding noise. That's right. He spilled his blood and water on Earth, and she pulled him in through the dead spring. She helped him up and over the side, and the dwarves healed him. He was badly damaged by the journey. He began to venture to the other lands, corrupting them and sowing the seeds of the harvest we are reaping even now. Finally, on his way back through the central lands, he met Ishara Rune, a great sorceress. Ishara told him that she could take him back to the earth through the dead spring, and he betrayed Silver. She was furious. She tried to murder them, to bar them passage back to your world. But Ishara's method used no blood, and Silver was helpless to stop them. They escaped back into the world of men, and Silver has been hateful of the race ever since. I felt that, I said, shivering at the memory of being fathoms deep, surrounded by a bubble of air kept in place by her whim. So she's been nursing this hatred for 1,000 years. I mean, ages. And 1,000 more. Water is not a forgiving element, Worm said. Glenn asked, one thing I wondered about. Does time in this world and Alana's world run parallel? Are 1,000 ages in our world 1,000 years in hers? That is a good question. I'm not sure if I can explain it. Time does not exactly work that way, not parallel lines. Time wiggles and winds. It's a dimension, not a line, Worm said, non-committal. Okay, moving on then, I said, shifting my weight to get more comfortable. There was a wind sprite in the castle of Rune who was sent there as a spy from Ambius. When we broke into the castle, he told us to follow him and that he'd lead us to Glenn. But Gable was haunted by spirits who told him it was a trap, and that Glenn was actually at the dead spring. How did the wind sprite turn traitor? Anyone can fall, Alana. The spirit of wickedness is strong in the central lands. That is where it began, and where the heart of darkness remains to this day. He fell because he allowed the shadows into his heart. You know what I speak of, do you not, elf? Glenn shuddered, and it looked like he was about to throw up. He swallowed with difficulty and nodded, unable to speak. I didn't like seeing him so afraid. I took his hand and held it in mine. It was the only thing I could do. He allowed the evil within him, and it corrupted him. But it's the subject of Gable's haunting that interests me. Why do you say he was haunted? Worm asked. Because he told me. He said that was why he drank for all those ages. The spirits wouldn't leave him alone. But in the castle, he said they were warning him. They led us to Glenn. Worm shrank back into his hole a bit, presumably deep in thought. Glenn was staring at me, but I couldn't meet his eye. I never liked keeping secrets, especially not from him. I let my gaze fall to the dirt beneath me, waiting. I see, Worm said, rising back up. Does the afterlife work the same way here? I asked, suddenly struck by the thought. I mean, in my world, I was taught that God's Son came to our world as a human and died on the cross, and if we accept that, we go to heaven. If not, we go to the place of waiting until judgment. Having not had a savior purchase your whole world with his blood, does the afterlife work differently? Glenn was staring at me with his jaw dropped. What? I asked him, surprised by his reaction. God's Son came to your world and bought the entire race of men with his blood? He asked. I could see that he was fascinated by the thought. Not only the men, people, I mean, but all of creation. The Bible says he ransomed all of it. After all, it was his to begin with. But Rock's brother, the serpent, tricked Eve into eating the fruit of knowledge, which opened up a whole can of crap. Yes, Worm interjected. The afterlife works differently here. One is judged by one's deeds, one's life. Our reward is determined based on works, not faith. It was my turn to gape. I could never imagine being good enough to earn my way into heaven. It boggled my mind. People in my world said they believed they were good enough to get into heaven without faith, but faith alone was required. Strange to be in a world where the opposite was true. There was no Redeemer here to have faith in, except for you, Worm said. I froze, suddenly nauseous. What? I whispered, looking in the general direction of where I imagined his eyes would be. He had heard my thoughts. You are the hope for this world, not the payment for sin. Only perfection could achieve that. No. You are the Redeemer of our world because you carry the same blood in your veins as the one who corrupted us. Sin came through a hybrid creature. He was half man, half angel. Since you carry the same blood, you can spill yours in payment and penance for what he did with his. What'll happen to him, the warlord, if I complete the quest? Will he continue to survive, or will this act destroy him? I don't know the answer to that, Worm said. It's not for me to know. I know only what pertains to my world, and to you, dear Shattered One. Okay, but tell me this. If Gable lived his life as a terrible person, did horrendous things, but in the end, he did something truly brave and selfless, would that get him into the good afterlife? Or is forgiveness not as easy to come by here? Glenn sat up straighter and focused on Worm, unblinking. I felt for him and hoped the answer would be one we would like. Forgiveness, I think, is even easier to come by here. No one had to die to let others be forgiven. No purchase price of forgiveness has been stated or paid. In the end, Gable chose to be what he always could have been, a loving elf with a purpose and a servant of others. Even though he did some truly despicable things in his life, in the end, he repented of them and even made the ultimate sacrifice. I think it's safe to say that he is in the Father's house," Worm said. I stole a glance at Glenn and saw a solitary tear fall. It made me glad to think of Gable as forgiven, in heaven with Lillian and Elenon. No more sin or darkness between them, only love, never-ending, unconditional love. If someone had asked me if I was a Christian a month ago, I probably would have said no. Perhaps it was a product of my programming that had made me so cynical, that I knew the facts. I even believed them. I just never surrendered. Now, after all I'd seen and done, after knowing that God was the same in at least 2 completely different realms of creation, how could I doubt? I felt pleasantly surprised to now consider myself a woman of faith. I squeezed Glenn's hand, and he smiled at me. "You are a woman of faith," Worm said, speaking my thought aloud. "And you are the princess of our realm. The power of the angelic blood has awakened. You will complete your task and save an entire world from destruction. Now go. Enough questions. You have healing to do. I'll meet with you again tomorrow." He slid beneath the surface of the earth. I stood and held out my hand to help Glenn up. He took it, and I pulled hard, a bit too hard. He fell into me, knocking me back several paces. We shook with nervous laughter, trying to slough off the conversation and regain our balance. It was a nice change from all the thinking and questioning. I wasn't built for such things, but laughing in the arms of this man, I was made for that. He led me up the stairs, silent for the most part. I'd had enough of silence. I poked my finger at the crack of his bum and he yelped, jumping ahead 2 steps. "What in the world are you doing to me?" he asked with sincere shock, covering his backside with his hands. "It's called a puka. Better run. I'm gonna getcha." I chased him up the stairs, trying to get him again, but his long legs gave him a substantial advantage, and he escaped. My laughter didn't help my speed any, but seeing him run like that was just too funny. We shot out through the wooden door and into the enormous kitchen. The smell of fresh herbs and steaming root vegetables was enough to send my stomach into a fit of toddler proportions. Glenn's belly growled loudly, in harmony with mine. We chuckled at the looks the gnomes were giving us. They wanted us out of their kitchen. Walking through the archway and into the corridors, we realized we didn't know where to go exactly. We continued along the hallway, admiring the rich tapestries and ancient paintings that hung from the walls on either side of us. There were doors along the passageway, but we didn't know which one to choose. Finally, the hallway ended, and a giant wooden door stood before us. We pushed it open and stepped into a winter wonderland. Snow glittered from every surface. It wasn't quite midday. The hazy sun was high, but not yet at its zenith. Evergreen trees peeked from beneath thick snow cover. The light of the sun made the whole world sparkle, and I did a happy dance. We reached for each other and bounded down the steps into the courtyard. The snow was deep and freshly fallen before we plowed through it. I had to lift my legs high to walk. It was up to mid-calf. Glenn seemed unhampered by it, running ahead. I noticed he had a slight limp when he ran that disappeared when he walked back over to me, swept me off the ground, swirled me in the crisp air, and kissed me playfully. I had just touched the snow again when he pulled me down into it with a muffled thud. We made snow angels side by side, looking up at the enormous stone castle. It was carved out of a cliff so dauntingly majestic that my heart squeezed. The mountain was truly vast. The castle was intricately carved inside and out. Spires and towers softened the sheer cliff face behind them. The stone was dark gray, almost black, streaked through with ribbons of sparkling crystals. When the sun struck the ribbons, the effect was dazzling, nearly blinding, and absolutely glorious. Golden eagles swirled around the towers overhead, looking for a snack. I saw the gardens then. Acres of black, rich soil with green arms reaching up in praise, basking in the sun, encased in glass to protect them from the snow. I saw the giant trees at the corners, oranges and grapefruits smiling from their warm nests among the branches. It was beautiful, backed up to the walls of the castle so that the warm southern sun would kiss them with sweetness. Glenn rose, helped me up, and we looked down at our handiwork. 2 angels, wings touching, smiled up at us. We walked toward the wood doors then, away from the castle. We were in a bowl-shaped courtyard, sealed in on one side by the great mountain, and on all other sides by a forest of evergreen spruce and spindly naked birch trees. We made it to the edge of the forest, and were about to step into the trees, when a call from the castle dooryard made us stop and turn around. It was Gaia, waving her arms frantically and squawking like a chicken laying an egg. We started walking back slowly, feeling like children robbed of an adventure. Gaia reached us, panting and wheezing. "Do not enter the forest," she gasped. "Why not?" I asked, walking back toward the castle and helping her to follow. The snow hampered her more than me, being that she was short and in so many layers of skirts. "There are gnomes out there who would not take kindly to other races. Gnomes are extremely territorial, mountain mentality. They would shoot you for trespassing without asking who you were. You must stay within the courtyard." "All right, Madam Gaia," Glenn said soothingly. "We're sorry." His easy charm seemed to work on her. She began to smooth down her metaphorical prickled feathers. My stomach growled again. "We're hungry too," I added. Gaia nodded and led us back into the house, to our room, where food had been placed in anticipation of our arrival. She left us to it, shaking her head and chiding us for wandering off. I thought she was overreacting. "I sure do love the food here," I told Glenn after the prayer, piling my plate high with kale coated in garlicky cashew cream. "It's great to have warm food again. Good home cooking." After the meal, we retired to the bed for a nap. A storm was rolling in. The menacing black of the blizzard crept upon us while we slept, the voice of the wind screaming through the naked trees of the surrounding forest. If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter is released.